Hey, and welcome to MBA Waves. My name is Eric Lucrezia, and we're going to jump right into it. Today, we are joined by, as usual, my fabulous co-host, Bara Sapir, as well as our featured guest, Lindsay Sage from Sage Admit. MBA Waves is a weekly vidcast where we dive into all topics related to the MBA and testing and networking and all good things like that. So it's your opportunity to ask questions, to even get to meet some great coaches from around the world, as well as some fantastic business schools. So without further ado, I'd like, Bara, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Bara Sapir. I'm CEO and founder of City Test Prep and now the online platform Mindflow. I'm also a dog foster person, and this dog is vying for my attention. So hopefully he'll calm down. But you might see like little pieces of him like right now, which is so unprofessional. But it's great to see everyone. Lindsay, welcome. And it's great to have this chat today.
Thanks, Bara. And Lindsay, why don't you tell us a little about yourself and Sage Admit?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I'm so excited. I met Eric at a conference. We have a conference of admissions consultants and coaches that get together annually, AGAC, and that's where I met Eric. And I watched your session last week, so I'm so excited to be here. I am the founder of Sage Admit. It's a boutique admissions consulting firm. It is me. I'm based out of New York City. My background is in psychology and in education. So I started working at Columbia, coaching undergrads. And then I was at NYU Stern, where I worked in the business school in admissions. And so I had that admissions committee experience. I left admissions to start this kind of work. I wanted to do full-time coaching work, and I'm now going into my 8th season where I have seen it all.
Nice. Thanks, Lindsay. And once again, my name is Eric Lucrezia, and I'm the founder of Candidate Coach, also a boutique admissions consulting firm, but I'm based on the other side of the Atlantic in Paris, France. And so today's topic on MBA Waves is navigating the waitlist zone and rejections. Do you reapply or not? So we're going to get into this conversation. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to type them in the comment section, whether you're listening to us via Facebook, LinkedIn, or YouTube. So let's just jump into it. So, we're talking about two things today here, which could both lead to a lot of frustration and anxiety. So let's talk about being waitlisted. If we get a waitlist letter in the mail, how do we interpret that? And Lindsay, I'll let you take off or start off with the answering.
Yeah, I mean, it means they're interested in you, right? They like you, but they're waiting to see how the rest of the class is shaping up. So they just don't know if they have space for you, and they're asking you to stay put.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely better than a full out rejection. I know it can be like really stressful and anxiety ridden to not get admitted straight away, but it is not the worst thing. It is, like you said, it means they are interested, and there's so many other factors, that come into play. Namely, who your competition are. How many other people are applying in that particular round. Looking a little bit more deeply, especially if they have. They're trying to keep a balance of diversity. So if you're applying from a country that may have a lot of representation already, that could play into it. So there's a number of things. So Lindsay, I'll ask you again, what's the best thing we can do in response to a waitlist letter?
Yeah, so I always say to my clients, 50% is what we can control, and we will do the maximum there, but the other 50% is just totally out of our control, which is, as you said, just how the class is shaping up, how the profiles, who applied, who else applied. So that you really don't have any control over. But what you can control, I would say, just really think about your application and think about where you came up short. So it's really easy to compare your profile to the class profile. All the schools post their class profiles online. So if your test score is lower than their average test score, think about retaking it. If your number of years of experience is below the norm, you could have a recommender write in and explain a recent project about where you took on more leadership or ownership. The tricky thing, if you've been interviewed, because that's one thing too, right? You could be interviewed after, you could be waitlisted after you've been interviewed. And sometimes the interview went great and it's still just a matter of how the rest of the class is shaping up. But other times, maybe the interview didn't go so well. So you could think about, well, did that interviewer maybe not advocate for me in the best way? Could I get someone else that's important to the school to advocate for me? So, current student, a recent alum, could they write a letter of endorsement to my behalf? So the response is to come up with some actionable steps to take, but then also to be patient and to wait to make a plan B, to make other plans, and to manage your anxiety, which I'm hoping Bara can talk a little bit about.
I was actually thinking about what you were saying when you first started off. You said you think about what you can control, right? And you can control, like what you were saying, your application and your interviews and your score to a certain extent. But it also is who you are going in to the whole process and how you can look at it with a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset, which means that you look at it as an opportunity to learn about yourself and what didn't go right. And if you do have anxiety, getting some skills in place so that you can be emotionally regulated through the process and really understand that it's not, I mean, it's personal, but it's really not personal often, right? And there are just things out of your control, and to look at it as an opportunity for the next step, either bolstering up your application and what you already presented in whatever way, Eric and you can actually talk about what you can actually do going forward. But also, what else are you going to do? What's your plan B? What's your plan B? And how are you going to be excited about it and enthusiastic about it? Because if that's what the world is presenting you, and as much as you put forward, how are you going to move through it with grace and positivity?
Absolutely. And I would add to that, I mean, like, it's totally true. You want to look at what you can control and what you can't. You can't control things like your work experience. On the other hand, something like a GMAT score, you absolutely can. That's going to depend largely on how many times you've taken already, because I think as most experts in the field, most industry professionals would agree that you tend to plateau off by the third or fourth time. You're probably not going to improve very much unless you have a real shift in the strategy that you take in your preparation, right? Maybe that's about working with a totally different coach with a totally different strategy, or maybe actually going to pivot from a GMAT to a GRE, because most schools do indeed accept a GRE, and that might be more your strength. Bara, this is definitely more your domain that you can speak to. But the other side of things is also any sort of advancements you've had in your current job, right? If you've been promoted to a higher position or been given more responsibilities, these are some things that you can speak about that show that you've been given more responsibility and that you've thrived, and this definitely speaks volumes, especially if it's some kind of management role. Usually there's some leadership experience required anyway in the application, and you probably wouldn't have been shortlisted if you didn't have some kind of leadership, like managing a project, managing budgets or products. But managing people is kind of another level, right? That's a whole nother step in leadership. So if you get a management role like that, that's definitely something you want to speak about. And I think when in doubt, the best thing you can do is speak to the recruiter, the person you've built a relationship over this time, and ask them, what's the best way to communicate this kind of information? And they might have different ways that they prefer that. Does that about round it off for everyone with that question?
Yeah, I do want to say that, I do want to just say one thing, is that you really can always improve your test score. And it's exactly like what you said, which is that you want to find out what's not working. And I often, the way that you talked about working with different professionals with it, if you're not improving and you're plateauing, it's like, think about it like a weave. You want to strengthen the weave by getting other skill sets from other ways. You don't want things to contradict what you've learned and how you've learned it, but it is a coachable test. So you can improve your score always.
Absolutely.
Can I add one thing there?
Okay.
So now that the EA is out, like, this is interesting, right? So I had a client who, she had a lower than average GRE score, but she had just everything was awesome in the app. So she ended up getting waitlisted by 2 of her schools. And then we rerouted, and I was like, hey, those 2 schools take the EA, right? Like, so she didn't plan to take the EA because not all of her schools had taken the EA, but the 2 schools that she was waitlisted for did. So she took the EA like on a weekend, because it's an easier test to study for. It did awesome and got pulled off the wait list of those 2 schools. So it was just sort of like an interesting think outside the box with these test scores now that there's waivers and EA and like all these different levels.
The EA is just looked at differently than the other tests. I definitely wouldn't want someone to think it was like cake. It was a cakewalk.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Because a lot of people, I shouldn't say most, a lot of people think the GRE is actually easier than the GMAT. Just the math is a little bit different and it deals with vocabulary and not with grammar. But because the EA is looked at differently by schools, it's just an easier, it seems like it's an easier way. It's a softer, it feels softer to me. You know, it's half the time as the GMAT. I mean, we've talked about the EA and the GMAT. We don't have to get into the weeds here, but it is something for students to consider. And it's great that you were able to think outside of the box in how to help the client present themselves in the best light.
Absolutely. So is waitlisting, do you think, more common in the earlier rounds or later? And like, should we handle this kind of thing differently if we get that news in round one versus a later round? What do you think, Lindsay?
Yeah, so my experience both working in admissions and then also on the coaching side is that between round one and round two, it's pretty equal pull. So it's really more about your profile and more than anything else. So it's equally waitlisted in round one, round two. Round three, so I'm talking like after January, is late. So you know, at that point, the class is mostly filling up. And if you're from an oversubscribed group, they might have sort of like maxed out on what they can do for you. So if you were waitlisted for round three, it's very likely that you might have been admitted if it was a round two or round one, and you were just too late. So in that case, you're a good applicant to reapply. Eric, what about you and your program? What was it like? Did you guys pull equally between round one and round two?
Yeah, more or less. More or less, it was pretty equal. And then, you know, I guess we also in Europe tend to do things a little bit differently in the States, where in the US commonly you have the 3 rounds, right? You have the kind of September, the Jan, and the March. Whereas I find it a little bit more random in Europe. Often there's more rounds, and they don't necessarily align.
And
with
it's
this.
later.
Yeah, a little bit. I mean, when I was working at SEC, the round one was usually, it was around September as well. But then it was kind of like every 2 months there was one. But other schools do 4 to 5 rounds. I know, like, again, HEC famously has one every month. So, you know, it really depends. I think it's less or like than in the States or in North America. But yeah, definitely I think there was more of equality around the first couple of rounds, and then depending on how that went, right, the subsequent rounds would go differently or accordingly. Yeah, I don't know. I tend to think that in the first round, if you're shortlisted, then, well, that's something that you have more hope to get admitted in the later round, logically, right?
You have more time. Yeah, more time. Yeah, and especially to hedge for your round two, right? Like to sort of throw an application together for the January. When you're waitlisted from a bunch of schools round two, you're kind of stuck, right? Because what are you going to do? You're thinking about a re-app for next year versus rushing something together for round three when the majority of like the more competitive schools, that's a little late for them, right? Particularly if you're an international applicant, because they just can't get the visa together in time too.
So this is, again, a little bit American, just for those who are not looking at American schools, right? So round two would be usually in January, right? And so international, meaning like non-American people applying. But yeah, absolutely. You know, round two in Europe could also be in December, November, December. So it really depends. But yeah, the idea being that later rounds during that cycle, during the academic school year, less chance that you would be looking more at a reapply. But also you may and probably are looking at multiple schools, right? Most people don't apply for just one. And, you know, that's a question that I asked on this week's Monday Sound Off. Like, do people, when they get a waitlist letter, is the idea to more focus on other schools? Is it to contact the school, to do nothing and wait? What do you think? If you don't have anything to add, Lindsay, what would you say? Should you contact the school to ask about feedback? Is there something they can do, or is it better to remain silent and polite? Like, what do you think?
Yeah, I saw that poll and I thought, can I select all of them?
It depends, right? That's always the answer, right?
I want to do all those things. Yeah, my experience with the more competitive schools, in the US and in Europe too, is that they won't speak with you really. I don't know. Have you had luck? I mean, we will try to, but most of the time the waitlist letter comes with a, we will not be able to speak to you. Please send any updates into the portal. You will upload them here. So I just, follow the instructions. If you do have someone you've been working with, absolutely reach out to them. Figure if you have a contact, get in front of it. But if you don't, it doesn't mean that you're not special, that they don't like you. It just means that they're processing 5,000 applications. So just follow the rules of what they're asking you to do.
I think that's just generally good advice. You want to always follow instructions, whether it's on the website, whether it's what somebody, a recruiter or an admissions person told you in an email. Follow what they're asking for. And I think that the policy of not speaking to people comes from being very solicited by people who are very high strung or panicking about their admission, right? So it can be intense to deal with all that, but also to be fair and equanimous, to not, give additional attention to somebody like when it's the moment, because again, you don't really know what's going on behind the scenes. There could be a whole host of reasons to determine why and when, by the way, they're going to start looking at people who've been waitlisted. So you kind of have to sit tight. Often is the case. If you don't have something specific or concrete to add to your file, you're better off like sitting tight and following their policy.
Yeah, the schools, sometimes they'll have like info sessions for waitlisted applicants, or they'll do like a little video. I know Yale has a waitlist manager, so that's sort of nice because I think people do really want that person. It makes them feel like someone's reading what they're writing rather than submitting it into this portal. But it really does, but even if the system feels cold, it's not. I mean, we really were reading everything that came in. It was just that the system is in place to organize it and keep a structure.
Yeah, a big part of that will depend on the school. How big is the program? Is this a school that welcomes like 1,000 people a year or like 30? And there is that range. 30 is the minimum.
And how big is the wait list? Yeah.
Right. Which is an indication of like their acceptance rate and how many people apply and so forth. But is it a school that intentionally tries to keep the class very small because they want a very exclusive, very personalized approach? And what I was just about to say is that 30 is the minimum that an MBA program can have to be eligible for ranking in the Financial Times rankings. So anyone that's on that top 100 list will have at least 30, but I do know of a good number of schools that have that like 30 to 50 range, or maybe like 100 max kind of thing. That's pretty small. Whereas other schools, they may actually be young programs, and they're doing their best to get numbers up. So they might be small, but they're trying to grow. So that's also something to keep in mind. Like you, again, don't know what's going on behind the scenes and why they have certain policies. But I don't think there's any school out there that's trying to be cold or mean or whatever. They try to have as human as an approach as possible. But for the schools that, like, let's just say it, like Harvard's and Yale's and so forth, like they're extremely over solicited. And I think that's just what they have to do. They don't have the manpower to deal with that. So this is a question that comes up, and I know you guys know the answer. I'm just going to put it out there right now, just in case people are wondering still. But if you're rejected, are you allowed to apply in a later admissions round or the following year, or is that school off limits entirely, and you should just forget them? What would you guys say?
Yes, you cannot reapply in the same cycle. So you can't apply round 1B waitlisted or denied, and then if you're denied from round 1, you can't go and reapply later on with that same cycle, but you can reapply the following year, and you should. Reapplications are absolutely a great thing. Schools love reapplications. Be smart about it, in a sense of come up with a plan, talk to a coach. You don't just want to sort of sling mud on a wall and hope it sticks this time. You want to be very targeted about what you could be doing better to present a better application. But schools love reapplications. Even the top schools, Stanford, Wharton, I've had really good luck with reapplications.
Sorry, there's a comment that popped up that I did not see before. This refers back to earlier, the testing we were talking about. David shares that the GRE reading passages are definitely harder than the GMAT for his perspective. It's really, I think, an individual thing.
It is a perspective thing, yeah, for sure.
100%. Thank you, David, for the comment. I'm just going to pop that out of there. But yeah. Coming back to reapplying, schools, I totally agree, Lindsay. They do love that. They love growth. And that's the same thing goes for the GMAT score. If you're willing
Yeah.
to retake the GMAT and show that you're willing to put the work in and, like produce the best version of yourself, 100%. So a reapply is great. And you have that full year usually to show like significant things may have happened, in your career and your life and so forth. So to be able to talk that and show a certain maturity, like development in your understanding of how like the admissions process works, about business in general, about human communication, all of those good things is great to show. So you should not be afraid. But yeah, unfortunately, I've never heard of a school where you can apply during the same cycle, that same year.
I think we've actually said a few times at this point about, and I'm just going to reiterate it, and we've said it in other episodes too, and I said it earlier, is that it is about growth mindset. It is about what's the opportunity that you're taking in this moment of rejection to make things different for the next time. And schools see that. They see it, like you said, Eric, in your test scores, and they're going to see it in how you approach things, and then they can track that, right? I would imagine both of you have worked like more closely with this, but you can track where you're actually seeing in motion how people are responding, which is what they want to see as a business leader, right? So if you're demonstrating the mindset of a business leader and the growth mindset, that's only going to fare incredibly well. If you wind up throwing everything back in exactly the same way, you're probably going to get the same results, right? The quote is, insanity is doing the same thing and thinking that you're going to get a different response, right? And it's
Right.
a little like that.
Totally. There's another comment that just came in from Advahesh. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. So in case people can't see it, I'll just read it. So how to boost your profile other than test score improvement when someone is waitlisted by a bunch of schools? What should be the right approach to schools? He's saying he tried to reach out to waitlisted schools and no one responded. If someone is rejected or waitlisted by the school, then a candidate should apply to that school or choose another school. Oh, it's a few questions actually. If you're a reapplicant, then it will hurt your chances. So Lindsay or Bara, do you want to tackle that or any of those questions?
The only thing I want to say about this, honestly, is that I didn't go to business school. I went to graduate school. I've been to a few graduate schools, and when I went to Michigan, and I felt that they really went out of their way to talk to me. Like even on campus, if some of the professors in the program saw me, they would talk to me. And sometimes I kind of think that if I'm being waitlisted or rejected somewhere, I want to think about do I want to be part of a club that wouldn't have me as a member? Right. I think that that's something to also keep in mind, that the schools are showing you who they are as well. Maybe, but that I feel like that is in the deck of cards here to consider. I would want to be, and I want my clients to be someplace where they're really wanted. So granted, the wait list is that you are wanted, but they're trying to figure things out. But also consider where are people going to be we want you. And that's where I wound up going to graduate school, was because Michigan.
It is
really
a mutual selection crisis. Like we talk about sometimes, admissions is like dating, right? So to respond to what Avadesh says there, it is a bit of what we already said. I want to give Lindsay an opportunity to respond before we jump in.
Yeah, so I would say if they keep the door, it's fine if no one's responding to you. Again, it doesn't mean they like you. It just means they're overwhelmed with their thousands of applications that they're processing. So if you want to submit it, but if they do allow you to send things in, and they will allow you unless they're saying don't send things in, then you can send things in. So I would update them with a reflection letter. So with my clients, we usually start with a general reflection, like, thank you for continuing to consider me. I'm very much interested. I've reflected on my application. Here's some things that I'm going to do, and put together an action plan. So I got this C in Calc. I'm going to take this math class. I just enrolled in this online math extension class. I'll send you the results when I'm finished. Number 2, I have this new project at work. I'm going to have a senior colleague write in on my behalf. And number 3, I've been going to virtual sessions and I'm speaking with students. You might hear from some of them to endorse me. And so this really shows that A, you're interested, because if you're not going to do some of those things, they're going to assume that you're not interested and you've moved on, and they don't want to go through the operational mess of sort of admitting somebody off the wait list only for them to not come. So put together the action plan and then follow through with it. And then that's also sort of really nice because in admissions, we're always thinking about like, how would this applicant be in front of a recruiter? Like you're constantly thinking about how's this resume going to do for a recruiter? How's this person's behavior going to do for a recruiter? And there's nothing a recruiter loves more than like, here's what I'm going to do. Here's my action plan. And I'm following through with it. So I think it really kind of speaks to your behavior and what kind of student you'd be and that you'd be successful in the program.
Love that. A very proactive approach, structured, organized, and then the follow through is key, right? Doesn't mean that you're going to have ace that math class that you said you would take, but at least that you've taken it and you have followed up with the results, favorable or not. That's really important. And again, we said this before. I'm not sure if Avdish was with us at that time during the episode, but we mentioned like if you don't have something concrete to submit to them, you probably should let them be. And if they do give instructions, be sure to follow them. So I think that pretty much answers that. Just moving on, and also speaking about rejection, like if you do decide like next year that actually you don't want to, speaking to Bara's point, if you don't want to continue to apply to this school because you would have wanted them to want you, right? So you're going to focus on other schools. You're kind of turning away from that school where you've been waitlisted or rejected. Do you need to disclose? This is the question. Do you need to disclose that you've been rejected by another school for an MBA program?
No.
So,
what do you, I mean, you don't want to go on a date with someone and be like, oh, this last person didn't like me, so that's why I'm in front of you. You know, I mean, no, because, and you don't need to. I mean, schools know, they can assume that this is a process filled with dings and, you know, moments of discomfort, and like, they know that. So and it doesn't mean that you're not an attractive applicant to them because another school didn't like them. All the schools really are looking for slightly different things, and they might really like you for different reasons. So no need.
Yep, totally agree. All right, so going back to waitlisted, was there any other pitfalls you want to throw in there that we should avoid, that candidates should avoid if they're waitlisted? Anything else you want to mention?
Well, I think we kind of touched on this to sort of not annoy them, you know, like really listen to the instructions. If it's upload your new test score to the portal, upload it to the portal. People get nervous, no one's going to see it. So they like email the 12 people they've met at the school with their new test score. And it's like, oh, that's maybe not what they want. Because again, going back to recruiter, are you going to be that kind of annoying person with the recruiter and then the recruit, you know? So we're always thinking about that level of professionalism and taking a pause and a breath before you act sometimes. I'm sure Bara is better at talking about those kinds of things.
Bara, anything else to chime in on? We're kind of rounding out the episode. We're 30 minutes in.
You know, I think that this particular episode, more than some of the other ones, really is a marriage between the being productive and putting yourself out there, but also doing the inner work, right? And really doing the assessment, because rejection is challenging, being waitlisted is challenging, and you know, I don't want to gloss over it. You know, when you're all of a sudden given a no, how you respond to someone's no is different than not yet, right? Not yet is not a no. A not yet is maybe a yes later, right? And so the inner work that we need to do to confront that in not just, I mean, applications in life, right? So this again, which I've said many times on the show, is that this is all a simulation of real life, ultimately, right? It's just that it's in a formulaic, systematic way. So how do you want to respond, and who do you want to be in that moment? And gaining the skill sets to do that is super valuable and useful.
100%. Lindsay, anything else to add? We wrap up the episode on waitlisting and rejection.
No, but I mean, I've seen countless people pulled from the wait list. I've seen countless people pulled, you know, readmitted. So I mean, you're sort of more than that decision as a human being. And I see it from a different lens because it's not me personally, but there's nothing, don't take it personal. It's just a competitive process, and all sorts of things can come out of it.
Sure. You mentioned a word previously, dings. It's kind of an in-house jargon, right? When things don't go
Yeah.
according to plan and you have to fix it. Yeah, this happens a lot, and people do pull themselves out, and that's like one of the great actually reasons of working with a coach, because they help take a little bit of the emotion out of it. It's like super intense. You're putting your heart and soul into this, all you've got, and you trying to be the best candidate you can be, and to be told either no or maybe it doesn't always feel good, right? But there's loads of things you can do, and it's about finding the right things and the right timing and the right delivery of those things. So all that comes into play. Lindsay, thank you so much. This was a great episode with lots of insight. Really fun.
Thanks for having me. This was great.
Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you to Bara also. Almost like switched into French. Listen, next week you have sorry?
Just laughing.
Oh yeah. Next week we have another really interesting episode, inviting back Charles Bennett, who is a business coach, talking about soft skills, which is arguably one of the most important things you can get out of an MBA. People talk about network, people talk about like some of those really tough courses like finance and so forth. Like, but I think soft skills really is something important, something that is an opportunity for growth. We talk about growth a lot in MBA Waves. And so we're going to get into that next week with Charles. So don't miss next week's episode. Same bat channel, same bat time. And thanks to everyone in the audience, especially those who asked questions, David and Navhesh, and of course to our fellow hosts today. So bye, everyone.
Good luck, everyone.
Good luck.